Go live?
Yeah, I'll mute myself and let's go.
Okay, we are live, and I know there's a probably 10-second delay. So I'm just gonna give it a second to make sure that we show up in LinkedIn, and then I'll turn this stuff off. Oh, there we are. Hello, everyone. You're hearing me about 10 seconds after I'm hearing me. So there's probably a little bit of a thing before where it's like, what's going on? But hello. Thank you everybody for joining. Sini and I are really happy to have you here. I am going to flip away from the actual LinkedIn, and I am back in where I'm streaming from on StreamYard. So if you are in the live with us right now, please feel free to drop a note in the comments and say hello to us. We can't actually see you, but we would love to know that you're here and just say hello to you personally. So feel free to let us know who you are, where you're from today, because we know people could be from all over the place, especially because we're going to be talking about immigration and job seeking and all the different barriers that are they feel like brick walls, even if they're not literally brick walls. In some countries, not naming anybody, some countries they're actual walls that are being built up against immigrants, but thankfully not anymore. And today we're going to be talking more about that. So this is actually the second in the series of lives that I've been putting on to talk about recruitment and specifically try to help and support racialized and equity-seeking people to survive their job search. So I am Rosie Young. I'm your host today, and I'm a Jedi coach, and I'm coming to you live from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And this is colonized land, which is also known as Toronto, Canada, and it's still home today to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people of Turtle Island. Now, I'm not Indigenous, I am Chinese, and I've been learning from Indigenous friends and community members just how much we need to go beyond diversifying our corporate workplaces to actually decolonizing them. So putting on these lives is one way that I'm taking action towards that as a Jedi coach. I'm here to help people with privilege dismantle systemic inequity while helping people without privilege survive it. And if you're not sure what I mean by Jedi, it's an acronym that I use to describe my work, first and foremost because I love Star Wars, and also because it stands for the causes that I am passionate about, which are justice, equity, decolonization, and inclusion. So today we are going to look at hiring, especially hiring newcomers and immigrants, newcomers to wherever land, like newcomers to basically English-speaking countries, because that's where a lot of the barriers extend. And we're going to look at that through a Jedi lens. So whether you're an employee or an employer, thank you for joining us. Employees, we're going to hear directly from someone who is going through the process, that's Sini, to give you some tips about that. So please ask questions, engage with us, engage with each other. There will be time for Sini to answer your questions. We're going to leave time at the end. So keep popping them in the comments, and we will get to them at the end, and we'll get to as many as we can. And maybe if you're already here, let us know, what are you hoping to get out of today? So I've described what we're trying to give to you, but what would you specifically like to know about or learn more about? Or just affirm in your own experience. If it's just to feel like you're not alone, that's great. Let us know that too. So let me know if this, as a start, let me know if this resonates with you. If you don't feel alone in this, or make me feel like I'm not alone in this. Have you ever experienced something like this? Picture it. You are sitting in front of your computer for hours trying to fill out these never-ending forms, which are confusing, and the instructions don't really make sense half the time. You don't really know what they're asking. You're flipping back and forth between, what do they mean by here? What is line 500A talking about? And you know that you need to give them the right answer that they're looking for because the stakes are really high. If you answer it wrong, you'll be rejected, and there's no second chances. Meanwhile, you know that if they could just get to know you, they would see that you're a good person, you're really qualified, and you're exactly the kind of person that they want. But the only way they'll even consider you is for you to fill out the stupid form, which doesn't actually show who you are at all. Oh, and then they also want you to scan and upload all sorts of like certificates and proof of ID and this and that. So you're trying to take a picture with your phone of these documents, but the file size is too big and it won't accept the upload, or it only takes PDFs and you only have the free software and it won't let you do this and that. Oh my gosh, does any of this sound familiar? Please drop a note in the comments to let me know that you've been there too and I'm not the only one. Hey, Katrina, very good to see you. Thanks for letting us know that you are wondering, how can we knock down walls? Hi, thanks for joining us. That is absolutely something I'm wondering and we're going to talk about today. So with this whole ridiculous online forum, computer, why don't you just get to know me personally? Sini and I have both been through that. It's so frustrating, right? Now, here's the big question. Did I just describe the process to apply for a job or to apply for immigration or a visa to get into a country? The answer is yes. It's happened to me in both scenarios. Now, maybe you already are a citizen of wherever you're working and you don't need a visa to get to work somewhere, and that's great. But have you ever tried to apply for a visa to go somewhere else? I have applied, I'm a Canadian citizen, I have applied for visas to go to China, Nigeria, Ghana, but you know which country has been the most exclusive to me or made me feel that way is actually Australia. I go into this in more detail, so I won't go through the whole story because it's in my newsletter, which I just posted on LinkedIn and also on my emails. So you can read more about my whole opinion about Novak Djokovic and the drama queen that's been, that he is and what's been going on there. But it just made me realize, even though I've applied for jobs many times, I didn't actually realize the similarities between going through this process of trying to get in somewhere as a country and also get in somewhere as a company. And in both cases, it feels very much like the people who are in control the process. They have the power, they have the privilege and the decision making, and they make me feel really small sometimes when they're like, you're in or you're out. And here's all the hoops that we're going to make you jump through for us to decide in all of our wonderful decision-making power whether you are qualified to come in or not. And the grounds and the criteria that they use do not feel like they really see me, like all of me and all that I bring to the table. It just tends to be criteria and things that make me feel like, okay, you've rejected me, but I don't know that you even rejected me for the right reasons. So I've talked a lot already, but a better person to give us more advice and opinions and also a real life account of what it's like to go through this, especially when you are both trying to stay in a country or get into a country and look for a job, is Sinyi Yap. Hi, Sinyi. Sinyi's here today to share so much of her knowledge and expertise. She is an ideas practitioner, and for her, ideas stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and social justice. Yes, we love our acronyms. Ideas is very cool. She is also one of over 40 million people living in the US today who were born in another country. In her case, it's Singapore. And Sinyi attended a US college as a foreign student with higher tuition fees, because that's how we treat foreign students, for the exact same education as a US student. But when she graduated, she is actually forbidden from working in the US unless she wins the immigration lottery. That's not really an exaggeration, and we'll learn how when she explains how this broken system doesn't work. And yes, Sinyi is a recent grad, but that doesn't mean she's not qualified. She is currently the co-author of Mario, that's another acronym, and it's an open source textbook for industrial organizational psychologists integrating anti-racism in their work. How cool is that? She's also a certified diversity and belonging facilitator and has worked with multinational organizations on DEI workshops and strategy implementation. So you would think that this US-educated, internationally experienced, certified DEI facilitator would be in high demand, right? Especially now when diversity and inclusion is supposedly so important to corporations. So why has it been so hard for her to find a job and a visa that will allow her to do what she loves in a country that she's lived in for the last 4 years? Well, what are these invisible and visible barriers? Sinyi, thank you for joining us today to talk so openly about this personal issue. I'm so grateful you're here. And before I turn the floor over to you, I do want to acknowledge that, first of all, I feel like you're very brave to be coming on and talking about a topic that is not only vulnerable and maybe triggers things for you, triggers for other people, but there's also a lot of stigma because we don't live in our capitalist society. It's not really okay to talk about how we need a job or we're looking for jobs. So on my part, I do want to try to make this as safe and open a space as possible for us to have a real conversation and for you watching right now to join in with us. So for all of you, I just want to commit that I'm listening and sharing from a place of love and respect, that your story matters and that your truth is welcome here. So welcome to all of you and welcome Xin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Rosie, for having me. And that's a very grand introduction. Definitely a reminder for myself, having dealt with imposter phenomenon, but that's not what we're here today. To really answer your question about how hard it is to get a work visa. And before we do that, I also want to say that I was not allowed to work until I get a work visa, not just after graduation, but as a student as well. I was only allowed to work on campus. And in a country where even their own students graduate with so much debt, you can imagine as someone who is international, who is charged a higher tuition fee if we do not have scholarship, um, and are not allowed to work off campus, that's a lot of walls, a lot of obstacles built against us. So that's kind of like something to note. And so going on to like talking about work visa. So disclaimer, I'm not an immigration lawyer. Just for legal reasons, right? I'm not an immigration lawyer. I don't study immigration law. It is what I know based on my journey so far in the States and also in the job search process. And so based on what I understand about the work visa in the States, it's called H-1B. It is a sponsorship required. Typically, employers will sponsor international candidates to work with them. And during this process, a lot of companies will have to hire immigration attorneys because there's a lot that goes into it. One of the rules that I read or requirements that I read that is pretty ridiculous in my opinion is that the company would have to put up the job on job boards and prove that Americans cannot fulfill that role, that they are that only the international candidate have what it takes to do that job. And so thinking about that, it's pretty almost impossible, right, for a country that is not just an economic powerhouse but has a huge population, that there's any job, especially in this capitalistic society, to say that there is a position that no one else can fill other than this international candidate. The another element of their work visa is that it's a lottery system, so it's not by merit. What happens is once the company goes through all of these requirements and processes, we are then put into a lottery system, which is essentially a black box as far as I know. It's almost like playing bingo and the lottery, and hence it's called a lottery system, where either you get it or you don't. And you will know when it's the deadline for the announcement. It reminds me a lot of Hunger Games, right? Where the person puts her hand into the big ball and like pulls out a tribute. So so that's kind of like the process of getting a work visa. It's really difficult from an employee standpoint or job seeker standpoint, and also the recruiter and organization standpoint, which we'll talk more about. But that's just kind of like an overview of how hard it is to get a work visa in the United States.
I'm really glad too that you brought up there's multiple types of barriers, right? So that financial barrier, that even when you graduate, you're already starting from a deficit, like literally a financial deficit, because it costs you more, you have less access to scholarships and funding, and so you're already even in more need, you could say, of a job to try to pay this stuff down. I think everybody in the States and Canada recognizes how expensive education is, and that the student loan, the burden of student loan. So that's a great point. It is not just about finding a job, it's also the level, like where you're starting from as a starting place. I want to, in these things, I'd like to ask sort of devil's advocate type questions, because I can think of maybe there were good intentions the way this stuff started. I think those rules that you described about the having to prove that nobody else can do it, and the lottery system, it is clearly intended to protect Americans and protect American jobs. So what would you say, I guess, to, well, isn't that the whole point? Like, as a citizen, shouldn't I have priority over non-citizens in getting these jobs? And if I already have the right to live here, why shouldn't this be the case?
That's a great question. And my response to that is thinking about that's what I just recounted is just the process of the work visa. I didn't talk about the conditions of the work visa. One of it being that unlike many other countries, which I'll get back to like why I bring this up, but America is one of the only few immigration systems left that is like doing a family-based visa issue. And that's why you hear a lot of news about mail order brides. There's even a whole TV series about it, right? 90 Day Fiance.
Right.
Because that's really one of the most easiest way to get a visa to be in the States to work. And the difficult part about this is that with this system, that means the work visa is very limited. It is quite literally a work visa in terms of I will be tied to a single employer, and I can only have a single stream of income under that work visa. So let's say for any reason, either I want to start my own business. My business cannot generate income. If my current job does not pay enough, I cannot have a second job. I also, based on my understanding, cannot have other jobs outside of the US. So, for example, I'm Singaporean. Based on my understanding is I cannot have another income from my home country. But of course, that last part I didn't really study in depth about because, I'm not here to be an entrepreneur and be Jeff Bezos. I'm here to kind of like chase my dream. And so basically what I'm trying to say and paint the picture is that yes, Americans should definitely have priority. At the same time, it doesn't make sense, again, if it's not just student debt, but also the average American holds anything from 2 to 4 jobs. And to say that because I do not hold a citizenship, that I can only have one job and a single stream of income, I cannot have paid gigs outside of that job. I cannot go on Fiverr and put up my services. I cannot even possibly even be paid for speaking engagements, which is part of what I do now. Then that's very limiting, and that's almost inhumane and quite dehumanizing. And it's very limiting, which I'll talk more about in terms of like my experience going through this like process of staying within the walls, staying within the boundaries. And another thing I'll add to that question is there are countless research that has already shown that international people coming in don't steal Americans' jobs. We do not just take up executive positions. In fact, a lot of the startups that have whether made it or just a percentage of startups in the country are by immigrants because we are not just hungry for that knowledge and a business mindset, but we genuinely want to give back to the economy. And to have the government regulations limit us in the way we contribute doesn't benefit the person who is trying to find a job. It doesn't benefit Americans in terms of the economy as well. And so that would be my response to that devil's advocate question.
There are a lot of really good points I want to pick up on in there, Sinyi. This is why she's so amazing and why we need to keep her here and put her into a DEI job or an ideas job. Now I'm losing my train of thought. But what you said about, yes, that it's, first of all, you're not just stealing American jobs, but even that concept of stealing jobs or taking jobs away from people, that is a certain worldview and mindset that is detrimental if you as an employer are serious about making your workplace more inclusive and diverse and equitable, but also finding talent, right? Like this is the cry in the great resignation and the war for talent and all these things that is coming out. If we're truly a global economy, and I would say COVID has made us even more so a global economy, there is talent around the world. And it doesn't have to be this fixed pie, win or lose mentality of if I hire someone who's not from my country or doesn't whatever, then like you could still find great talented people in and outside your country or living wherever. Doesn't that open other doors as well for Americans to find jobs in other countries and vice versa, right? So I think that's one thing to keep in mind about making things better for everyone, not just trying to limit yourself, which is hurtful to both employees and employers. But also what you said, Sini, about being dehumanizing, and I think that's going to come up more and more. So I do want to hear more about your personal experience about what has this been like for you trying to go through this crazy process.
You know, I'm gonna share this story which actually happened very recently, just a couple days ago. Nick, the knowing that if I were to make any slight mistake of like not reporting something, and they find out, so on and so forth, that I can get deported, puts a lot of stress on my mental health and my life. And a couple days ago, I received a call that can possibly speak at a very big conference, that I can possibly be exposed to a lot of people who have connections, and also just be a speaker, right? And that's kind of like what I love to do. And when I got off the phone, I was so excited because it's an opportunity for me. But then my significant other, who was there for the phone call, asked me, "Well, can you actually get paid for that? Like, does your visa allows that for you to do that now?" Um, and that kind of like felt like a punch in the gut, because it did not occur to me that, oh yeah, it's probably something that not just that I have to report, but based on my current visa, that I have to relate to my degree of global business and business analytics. If it doesn't, if I cannot explain why this speaking engagement or this whatever paid job that I'm taking up, if I cannot explain why or how it relates to what I've studied, then I cannot take up the opportunity. But what I'm trying to say is that it was a shift in my perspective, and it kind of affected me mentally, emotionally for a couple of days, because like I'm still not used to being a non-citizen, if that makes sense. Like, if you are in your home countries right now, if you want to go be an Uber driver, you can do that. If you want to put your services on Fiverr and earn some money, you can do that. But I can't. Everything I do has to be related to my degree based on the regulations. It has to be reported based on the regulations. And that is so disorientating. And it almost makes me paranoid that every opportunity that I get, I have to not just check back with my school, but also like, what if I didn't realize, like this speaking engagement, what if I didn't realize I took up the opportunity and I didn't report it, I didn't check with my school, just because I think that it's natural to, as a person with many interests and many talents, to be paid for what I do. I'm not sure if I kind of like explain my thought process right. Maybe people on the show can let me know, and Rosie, you as well. But that is not uncommon, that sense of like, am I doing this right? And almost that sense of like, I know I'm not doing anything wrong that breaks my visa regulations and requirements, but somehow I feel like ICE, the Immigration Enforcement Department of the United States, would just show up at my door and deport me. That's something that's so stressful. That is just incredibly. There's no other word to put it. Incredibly dehumanizing that I'm restricted like that, and it's almost like, and I had this moment last year of trying to reckon with the fact that I can no longer do what I do now. And for people who are curious, and recruiters as well, which we'll talk more about later, but I'm not under a sponsorship right now. I'm under this program called Optional Practical Training, or OPT, where I'm allowed to freelance. I'm allowed to kind of be independent for a year. And so I'm just taking this chance to relish in this, not just lifestyle, but this ability to earn from what I'm good at and not be restrained. But knowing that, I'll be put back into a box, after this June, was also very anxiety inducing. So that's kind of like what I would say about that.
I'm just kind of resting with that for a minute. Thank you for being so vulnerable about it. Like that sounds terrible. It I was doing something else yesterday, and what your point about the stress it puts on you, how dehumanizing it is, it actually ties in with how we're not honoring human rights. Like part of basic human rights is human dignity and not torturing people, not making them feel enslaved, or not enslaving people. And I know these are very strong terms, very strong words. I think employers would react pretty badly to this. Like, of course they're not, employees are not slaves. We're not torturing anybody. But what I'm hearing from you, and what I've also experienced, is that going through the job search process and then the additional layers of having to not do anything wrong and make sure you don't screw up or you'll get deported. Like that is emotionally torturing. And I think people need to remember, as recruiters, it's very easy to just to think about ourselves, to just get focused on, I have to find good talent. I have to go find, so many people are applying. It's so stressful to go through all these applications. But think about the stress that job applicants are going through and what they're feeling about it. The stakes are much higher. Frankly, the stakes are much higher for the people who need to find a job than the people who are looking for a job. So that's such an important call out and reminder. Thank you for that, Sini.
Yeah, and on your point, I think to all the recruiters who can be advocates, and I think also to Katrina's question about how can they help in knocking down walls, is to understand this process. What I've experienced throughout the past year is a lot of people want to help, but they're not interested in understanding this process. And just for the record, I am not I did not have all of this knowledge because I want to. I wish I can hire an immigration attorney to handle all of this. And frankly, if I have an immigration attorney, I would, like, it'll be year in, year out, right? Like whatever they tell me that I need to do, which I can completely understand. And because it's so complicated, but it is important. And one example I'll bring up is a lot of companies, they say that they do not sponsor, which is perfectly fine. You don't waste my time, I don't waste your time. However, there is a difference between we don't sponsor and we are just xenophobic. What I mean by that is, for example, under my program, right, OPT, which is what a lot of students who graduate, they get a chance to do OPT. And then for those of us who have a STEM related, which is like science, technology, engineering, and math, if we have any, like our degree qualifies under STEM OPT, we have an extension of 2 years. So that's 3 years worth, and no companies have to sponsor us. We don't have to go through the process that we talked about earlier in this show. In fact, all they have to do is to submit a PDF document of a training plan, indicating, okay, so for this 2-year extension of STEM OPT, here's how I'll train this candidate. And then every 6 months, the company will submit an evaluation of how the candidate is doing. And that's it. The only monetary part for the company is they just have to be e-verified by the government. So they go online, register their company as an e-verified company. And that's like in the hundreds. I remember correctly, it's $120 for the application. And so that's not sponsorship. Again, I'm not an immigration lawyer. Maybe it's considered under sponsorship. But I find it very xenophobic when companies are like, we don't do anything around international immigration processes. And besides, and this is actually, the following is actually what I've heard face to face, is, we don't hire people on visa and on sponsorship because, as the process is very opaque, and we have very low turnover. And so when we invest and hire people, we want them to stay with us for a long time. And that was very there was an excuse for me, to say the least, because as we know, people don't stay in a job till they retire anymore. Staying in a company for more than 5 years is considered very long. Rosie, you might have a different a point of view on that as a ex-recruiter, but yeah, to say that, this, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, it's not enough, and hence you're not interested in hiring international people, is xenophobic. To not understand what is the difference between sponsorship and OPT and STEM OPT, which does not require that the element of effort, sponsorship, financial resources, is xenophobic, in my opinion. You are discounting out a lot of talent, especially for multinational and global companies. And going back to like the whole devil's advocate of like, we want to protect Americans, right? Why are people on work visas more on like the executive side? Why are they CEOs of like big companies? Why are they directors of like regional divisions? And that's because that's how the system is set up to be. You only, like, the definition of talent that countries want to bring in, not just the states, is executives, right? But as we now know, and as with the great reshuffle, great reckoning, great vaccination, whatever we want to call it, we're coming to terms that talent looks in so many different forms and different ways. We're not abiding to that hierarchy anymore. And so to kind of rethink that, Portugal is one good example. They actually even have a digital nomad visa, for people who are digital nomads, and to kind of like just ease them into it. And so yeah, like, understanding, one way to be an advocate is to understand the process and the difficulties that we go through, so y'all can be advocates in your companies, to say that, know what you understand is not right, to HR or whoever, right? And be like, this is the process and this is what we have. Besides, we also have, for example, we also have a immigration lawyer that we work with as a company. Why not we ask them, is it true? Right, be our voice in companies, because we don't, as job seekers, as international job seekers, we don't get to speak to anyone unless we have a network in the company, unless we know the recruiter, unless we already have a first round of interview, which is not common. It's not common, especially for all. I'm sure all of us have at some point been a job seeker. You know how difficult it is to get even into a first round of interview at a company that you just cold applied to and not know anyone. Sorry, I just kind of went on a rant, but it's kind of like what I kind of like my my process, my thinking process as we were talking about this topic.
No need to apologize. It didn't sound like a rant to me. It sounded like just a lot of information that, frankly, somebody I know who is an equity consultant gave me a really great definition once of privilege, which is, if you don't have to think about something that other people have to struggle with every day, that's privilege. And for me, as a citizen of a country where I don't have to think at all about all of these additional problems, right, to find a job, that's my privilege. So thanks for changing our lens, right, and showing us what it actually looks like for a lot of people, not just one person, but millions of people every day. I'm wondering, wow, like I think there's even more. I can feel that you're just touching the surface, and that's why you had so much to say about that point. I'm wondering also how your own, in a way, maybe your own experiences counted against you. Like there's the barriers of just, you're not legally allowed to work and all those things, and how you get paid or don't get paid. But also, I think let's talk about the discrimination, the stigma and biases against foreigners, right? And so not only are you having legal issues about working somewhere, but, oh, here's this person that's from another country, you have an accent, right? Because you don't speak English like a typical American or a Canadian might do. Have you experienced, I'm going to assume that you have, but have you, or what have you experienced in terms of things that these are not problems for you, but people think that there are problems simply because you're a foreigner?
Let me start with microaggressions, and then we can escalate from there. So when I was in school as an international student, people assume that international students are rich. And probably for good reason. Again, we are charged higher tuition, and when we apply for student visa, we are required to proof with financial documents, either of our own bank statements or family bank statement, that we can provide for ourselves to the entire length of college education. So I get where the microaggression comes from, but what happens is then people assume that I assume certain things about me, right? And that one of them being that I don't need help, that I don't need career advice, I don't need career assistance, that I have things and opportunities laid out for me once I graduate. And that cannot be further from the truth, right? That I am a first generation low income graduate, and I'll say I'm a scholar, and what that means is I am I'm the first in my family to go to college, and also the first in my family to go to college overseas. So while I'm trying to figure out what college life can offer, which is beyond classrooms, right? It's about connections, about networking. I also have to figure out what I can and cannot do with my visa. And so that's one of the microaggressions that have a real life impact in like what advice I have received and what advice I was given as an international student. And like moving forward, interestingly with this question, as a workshop researcher, designer, and facilitator, there are research out there about the whitening of resumes. So what this means is not just international students, but students with marginalized experiences and identities as well. It's known that they would do things like, for example, adopting an English sounding name. Like, for example, if my name is Xin Yi, if I want to, I can adopt Cindy, I can adopt Jane, a completely different but very familiar sounding name. Because again, recruitment and just the general workforce dominates, like white culture dominates the process. And so writing our resumes again includes like, adopting English sounding name, includes excluding extracurricular activities that can expose them as like someone with marginalized experiences, for example, being the president of the Black Student Union, right? Or even being a member of the Asian American Association. So like actively covering those elements of ourselves so that we can get a better chance at getting a job. There's actual research around those, and there are actually accounts of students who have done that, or even veterans in the field, right? And so that is kind of like the stereotypes that I've faced so far. And I would say another microaggression, which is very funny as well. Looking back, right, it was kind of awkward at that moment. Was Americans assume that I don't speak English, and international folks think that I don't speak other languages. And that actually happened in real life, where I was, in a school building, and then behind me were Chinese students, and I was speaking to, my supervisor in English, and they say in Chinese, that she's so well dressed and like wow, A, B, and C. And I turned around, and I spoke to them in Mandarin, and they were surprised. And I can only say the countless times that I've had people tell me that, wow, you speak very good English. Even if I say that I am born in Singapore and that I grew up bilingual, people cannot wrap their heads around that. And just like FYI, there are a lot of countries out of the States that have their education system be in English, Singapore being one of them. And so those are some of the interesting experiences that I've experienced as an immigrant and international student in the US.
Really eye-opening, really eye-opening. And I also really like that. I feel like you're breaking the stereotype of the crazy rich Asians. I'll go in a little bit of a rant and just say how much as an East Asian woman, I don't feel like that movie represented me or Asian culture. It's you just said you're the first person in your family that went to college, let alone college overseas, and that movie just shows this lifestyle. It's like, I don't know who that is, but that's not anybody I know personally. And I don't even know if I want to live that life, but no, not all Asians are rich. And yet that's exactly what you said you encountered coming here. It's like, oh, well, if you're a foreign student, you must have a ton of money. Probably because they charge so ridiculously high fees that's kind of what it takes. But no, it doesn't mean that everyone's rich, just like it doesn't mean everyone in America who can manage to get to college is rich either. We just have to take on a lot of debt, right? So yes, thank you for showing a different side of Asians. Not crazy, not rich, just Asian. Yeah, sorry, rant.
No, and I also want to highlight that Crazy Rich Asians, funnily enough, is filmed in Singapore, my home country, and it features a lot of East Asian, or at least East Asian looking features, right? Fair skin and like almost Western features, like sharp noses and things like that. And so I just want to, bring to mind that the Asian community is such a diaspora and we all look so different, that all this Hollywood representation just don't do us justice. I don't think it's like different from our topic, but I just wanted to point it out. And in every time someone mentions like Crazy Rich Asians or something similar, that like for sure, yeah.
And I just saw Faria. Thanks for chiming in the comments there. That I think Faria really related to your comment, Sini, about being whether people think you could speak English or speak another language, and that's part of the challenge I think of being dual culture. Right? Anybody who's immigrated to another country, it's that dual culture tug of war almost of, well, you don't really fit in with where your home country or where your family came from, but people in your new country don't necessarily consider you native there either, and nobody thinks that you could speak whatever language, and it's complicated. It's harder than just being one place all the time. Yeah, absolutely, for you. We see you there too.
Yeah, and very hard to your point, right? I think also like an element, I mean, it's so nuanced and complicated, but I also think an element of that is how we look as well. Going back to like racism, when we don't look like the dominant white culture, people will be like, no, 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 where are you really from? And sometimes you don't ask that question, but you just say things like, yeah, like you speak really good English, for some reason, right? And so it's just something to think about as well for the recruiters, for anyone out there, who has never had this experience. Thinking twice about why you weren't asked that question. Let's say if you're from Europe and you come to America for an exchange, will you ever ask that question? And if you didn't have, and if you have an accent, for example, a French or German accent, do people react the same way to your accent compared to a Chinese accent, an Indonesian accent? My guess is that their reaction is very different.
Yes, yes, absolutely. You're actually making me think of this. Another side note: Trevor Noah on the Daily Show, he did a clip once about the world's sexiest accents, and they were, other than South Africa was in there, which is controlled. It's not the majority population white people, but it's controlled by white people. Let's be real. And everywhere else was also primarily white people were the sexiest accents. New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, stuff like that. Yeah. Nigeria didn't come up as a sexiest accent. Singapore didn't come up. So I never really, you made me think of that just now, Sini, about what's considered sexy accents versus, oh, you speak really good English for a person from whatever country that you're from. Yeah. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before we start getting into some questions is around experience. And Sina, you and I have talked a lot about certifications and oh, I can see you're eager to get into this, because I could also, like, first of all, your oh, sorry. I think we might have lost the stream, but I think we're back. So sorry, I was saying how employers might see you as inexperienced because you are freshly or relatively newly graduated, and therefore you don't have work experience, and you don't have American experience because you didn't work in the U.S. before, you haven't grown up in the U.S. So what are your thoughts on this bias, I will say, the stigma and the bias of you don't have experience?
We can talk a whole other hour about that, but so let me start from, as an ideas consultant and advocate and someone who really believes in a more equitable way of work, an inclusive way of work. it's just inequitable to have this vague definition of what it means to have experience. Um, One example I can give is my mindset shift, and this is for all the students out there or early career professionals. Um, One of the mindset shift that's important for me and I feel have an impact on my job search, a positive impact, is to see my role as a student and as a scholar, as a student leader, as a job. Um, we spend as students and scholars, we probably spend the same number of hours, if not more, right? Not just on our classes, but also on advocating on campus, on being student leaders, on uplifting our peers, on tutoring, A, B, and C. Those are experience and those are work experience. And those are experience that demonstrates your ability to perform in a job. And so I know at a lot of colleges, career advising, unintentionally they can disempower students and graduates by saying things like, oh, like keep your resume to one page, especially when you don't have much experience and you're a fresh grad, so on and so forth, right? I mean, it's memories that I don't really want to recount, and so I cannot really think of like specific examples more than that. But I think students out there get what I mean. Having for example like a resume template, right, which is like black and white Arial. Have your educational history, have your work history, and your history has to be chronological. Like um career advisors try to like feed us, and I don't mean everyone, right? I'm generalizing, and also based on my experience that they give advice that is a one size fits all when career searches, job searches, and career advising is so personalized. And I get it, like a career center is only like maybe 10 to 40 people versus like thousands of students. um but at the same time, like the students need real time advice and need real life advice. And I think to rethink, helping students rethink their experiences and make them feel worthy, And I also want to, again, to students out there, like you are worthy of whatever jobs you want, whatever salary you want, so long as you feel confident that you have what it takes, right? And we have countless researchers, countless discussions, and Rosie, maybe you can chip in on this. But we know that white males, especially when they go into interviews, they are seen for their potential, while people with racialized identities and experiences are assessed based on what we have already done. And so we need to play that game. We need to be confident and go into interviews and have that also appear on our resumes that I have what it takes. I am living as my authentic self, and that's going to be a value add to your organization. And it's going to be a loss that you don't hire me. Um, when someone used to say that to me when I was a student, I'm like, that person is out of touch. That person doesn't know what they're talking about. And that person is saying all of this because they've already have it made. They've already made it somewhere. And I'm here to tell you, I'm a job seeker. I am only less than a year out of college. And I'm here to tell you that as a non-traditional candidate, that I am doing that. And while I don't have a job now to kind of like prove that, but I know that I'll get somewhere where I feel belonged, and I feel that I'm in the space where I can be developed and also contribute to the organization. Because now's the time, with the great vaccination, great reckoning, now's the time to stop covering ourselves and also be proud of the talents that we bring. And if you need examples, right, in the political scene in the US, what has driven so much of the votes in the past election in 2020 is Gen Zers, are people who cannot vote. We know social media way better than people who are politicians, and they know, and so they're not using us, but engaging in us to engage with people who are using social media. And so we have leverage, right? That's just one example of in politics, but also in the workplace. We are so in tune to what the future generation, which is us, if you haven't realized, y'all, we are future leaders of the workforce. And we have the right to demand what is equitable, what is inclusive for each of us. And so kind of deviating a little bit from your question, Rosie. But yeah, just really rethinking experiences. And to recruiters, if you're listening to what I say and you feel uncomfortable and you feel like you want to challenge and be like, Sydney is not a recruiter, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I agree. And I want you to know that the power dynamics is different. You hold the power to recruit people. And I don't think does you or your organization any good if you were to continue gatekeeping in ways of saying that, well, student experience is not experience. Yes, you did part-time work while you are studying, and that's not experience. Yes, you did internship, but that's not the experience you're looking for. Well, to be equitable and to say that you believe in equity and inclusion is to be specific and precise in your job description. If you're hiring an entry-level role, and I think this will hit so many people's pain points. If you're hiring an entry-level role and you're asking for 2 to 3 years of experience, I would like to ask you to challenge yourself and your team who designed that job description to ask yourself, what exactly are you asking from people who have 2 to 3 years of experience? And is that actually entry level, right? Even for director level positions, if you're looking for 10 years of HR experience for a DEI role, which by the way, nobody cared until George Floyd's death, what exactly do you want out of a candidate who has 10 years of HR experience? Thinking about being specific, and this is coming from me as a facilitator as well, and a researcher. One way to be equitable, recruiters, is to be specific in your requirements from a candidate. And it not to be vague. When you say work experience, what do you mean by work experience? Don't just list like industry, but be specific about the skills that you want to see from them, right? And go into those interviews knowing that you have power dynamics that's different, and how do you make that candidate feel safe if you really care about equity and inclusion, especially for candidates with marginalized experiences. How do you make them feel comfortable going to this interview to tell you what they think and for you to uplift them? I've seen tons of recruiters on LinkedIn posting about, they're here to help us, they're here to uplift us. Then show us what that means. Tell us what that means. That's what I wish to see more in the recruiting realm.
Sydney, I was going to ask you to leave us with words of encouragement and advice for job seekers, and also, some advice for recruiters and hiring managers on how to break down these walls. But you just totally did that. I have nothing to add, just like mic drop. Everything was fire that you were talking about. I have a lot we could. This is me live, all right? This is why I edit the podcast. There's a lot more to carry on from this conversation. Absolutely, this does not stop today. This is not a one-time thing, and I'll go into that in just a short while. But I first want to affirm everything that Sini said, and also I want to decolonize or dismantle the concept of being self-confident. There's what I try to talk about in my coaching and in the program that I'm about to launch for recruiting support for racialized people is to be self-accepting. And that's what I'm really hearing from you, Sini. In the white supremacy culture language, it turns into, you have to be more, you have to show up confident in the job. And frankly, I don't want to be confident like what I see the sea of white male executives. That comes off to me a bit more as arrogant. This also then gets into cultural differences, where coming from a culture that is very shame-based and very much about humility and, don't self-promote, don't do that. I have an inherent thing when you tell me to be confident, it's like, but can I really do that with whatever? So I find it's also about being self-accepting about, as you said, Sini, what you bring to the table. You do have value. All those student projects that you worked in school where you had that one person who was not a contributor, and every group has that. How did you not learn about handling conflict and negotiation skills, right? And influencing other people. So you come out of life and of school with valuable experience. And I hope that people can start to see and appreciate that. for themselves so that they can be self-accepting and then come to the table in interviews and resumes with, yes, I do know how to do these things. Of course, I have a lot to learn. Doesn't everybody have a lot to learn? But I also have a lot of knowledge and wisdom and experience to come. So yes to everything that you said. I do want to go into questions. I don't see a ton of questions right now, which is also why I'm like, okay, it's great. Let's keep chatting. But just a reminder to folks to please do pop any other questions in. Katrina, I hope that we did give you some good ideas about dismantling barriers. But if you have any more specific barriers maybe that you want to ask about, please feel free to do that as well. And just while people are doing that, a couple of reminders and a little bit of how can you follow up with CUNY? Because I've been getting a lot. I think that Jenny asked about if this would be recorded. Yes, it's going to be recorded. So don't worry if you weren't able to write everything down, all the golden nuggets that CUNY was giving us. You'll be able to rewatch the video. I'm also going to be putting this out in audio only form on my podcast in about a month or so, and that will have full transcript and show notes. So you'll be able to see all that if you weren't able to catch the closed captioning. And CUNY, for people who want to follow up with you or just be more inspired by you, because you're so inspiring today, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Thank you once again, Rosie, for having me on here. People can follow me on LinkedIn, follow my hashtag sincerely.yours, that's spelled with my name. And also I have a website of the same name, sincerely.yours.space. When you talk about projects that you can showcase, I have a whole page of my portfolio. Many of those are actually what I've done in school. And so if you have any questions, feel free to reach out as well. And I also wanted to leave y'all with a Ruby Kaur's poem that she posted a few days ago that really pulled me out of that low point that I mentioned earlier, I shared earlier in this session, that I want you all to bring home with you and to relish in that. When Rosie talk about decolonizing self-confidence and the concept of self-confidence, one of my friends asked me yesterday, what actions do you take to live as yourself so authentically? And I say that, being in my work, being exposed to the conditioning that I'm brought up with, that I'm less than, that I need to play small, I need to be demure, A, B, and C, makes me understand that being myself is an act of resistance, and being myself is the best way I can contribute to the world. Is what keeps me forward, keeps me moving forward and keeps me courageous in that way. And this poem by Ruby Kaur, I think, succinctly explains, or not explains, but demonstrates that element of decolonizing self-confidence. And so her poem starts with, I am not a victim of my life. What I went through pulled a warrior out of me, and it is my greatest honor to be her. And that, even saying that, gives me chills, like my hairs are standing up. That has given me so much courage to keep on going this week, and I hope that helps you as well. And to Fariha's point on companies making it seem like they're doing us a favor, again, we can talk about that for a whole hour. But know what you're worth, at the end of the day. And fight for that. Fight for that. Yes, recruiters and companies have that power dynamic, have that upper hand in that way of that decision making. But you also make decisions when you accept or reject a role. You have the power and the right to say that thank you for your interview and your offerings. I'll move on from here because I think I deserve more. Or just say because I deserve more. Take out the I think. And I hope this session has given you all a better understanding of what international person goes through in terms of employment in the US, and also for my fellow students out there, some encouragement towards your job search process and decolonizing the way you see your career. Rosie, I think you muted yourself.
Oh, I did. Thank you. Thank you, Sini. I was actually going to apologize that I didn't mute myself when I was typing, trying to put things in the comments. But yeah, I did the right thing, but then the wrong thing. Thank you for that. Thank you for that word of encouragement and inspiration. And thank you for talking to Faria's points as well. Like that, Faria mentioned about being offered unpaid positions. Going back to what I had mentioned earlier around the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, what do you think getting people to, or coercing or convincing people that they should work for free is? That sounds an awful lot like free labor, which, that kind of reminds me about slavery. Again, I know that's a very strong and triggering word, but if we are suggesting to people that they don't deserve to be paid for their work and they should just be grateful to have an opportunity to work for people for free, yeah, that's slavery, and that is not okay, and also not legal in a lot of countries. So I know it's really hard for you. Trust me, I know it's hard, and at some point you're just like, what do I need to do to get the experience, right, to put on the resume? We're going to talk more about that in upcoming lives, and I think for recruiters as well, we should just be aware that this is happening, and anything that you can do to influence companies to get away from that kind of thinking. Sini described it too with public speaking. It's not just for employers or people trying to hire, it's in anything. Please pay people for providing their time and their value. If they provide enough value that you want them to do something for you and do it for an audience, then they're worth paying. So let's do that. Speaking of paying, if you feel that Sini has provided some value for you today, this is not a coercion or must do by any means. But as you heard, she's got still lots of student debts, and I think she did provide lots of value. So if you would like to financially contribute, if you're in a position to do that, I've dropped some links in the comments to do that through PayPal or through Venmo. And I think just to continue to reach out to her, she is fantastic to follow on LinkedIn. I learn a lot from her every single day. So I encourage you to do that as well if you haven't already followed her. Thank you, folks, for being here. It's lovely to be here with you in our community together. I do absolutely feel like it's a community. Thanks for showing up. Thank you, Sini. You're just an amazing inspiration, an amazing friend. Thank you so much for coming here. And please join us next week. We're going to have another LinkedIn Live next week. But yes, thank you, Sini. Final word to you.
Thank you, everyone. No, just thank you so much for your time. I look forward to responding to you on the comments as well. Thank you, Rosie, for your platform.
All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye for now.
Bye.